Nantic, a quiet coastal town, shattered by tragedy. Nestled on the southernmost edge of Connecticut, just a 2.5-hour drive from the bustle of New York City, Nantic greeted the summer of 1985 with its usual tranquility. With a population barely exceeding 3,000, neighbors in Nantic were more like extended family. Everyone exchanged waves on Main Street, and secrets, like the gentle mist rolling in from the Atlantic, never seemed to linger too long. The rhythm of life here was dictated by the sea. The Atlantic's salty breeze danced through open windows, children's laughter echoed from weathered boardwalks, and the weekend ritual of communal beach trips tightened the bond among locals. Groups of 3 or 4 families would pile into well-loved station wagons and head down the winding lanes, laden with picnic baskets and sun-bleached umbrellas. It was a place where doors were left unlocked and summer nights meant Little League baseball under golden streetlights. But beneath this postcard simplicity, 1985 was about to thrust the town into the icy grip of horror. The murder of a young, pregnant wife, someone known and cherished in the tight-knit community, shook Nantic to its core. The sense of security, as fragile as the sea glass scattered along their beaches, shattered overnight. News of the crime flashed through town faster than the storm fronts off the coast. Mothers clutched their children closer, rumors swirled in the corner store, and the familiar patter of friendly neighborhood gossip twisted itself into anxious speculation and fear. For the first time in living memory, the things left unsaid in Nantic became as heavy as the ones spoken aloud. The details themselves were as haunting as any urban legend, only this time the tragedy was real, and it wore the face of one of their own. The murder didn't just take a life, it robbed the town of its innocence and left wounds that would throb beneath every routine interaction for years to come. From the weathered benches of the town square to the pews of Sunday congregations, disbelief and suspicion quietly replaced trust. Police cars became a common sight on the sleepy streets, and crime scene tape fluttered awkwardly where bunting once hung during holiday parades. Every theory and passing comment seemed weighted with existential dread. Nantic, once a symbol of coastal comfort, had become headline news, and none of its residents were ever truly the same again. The perfect family, a deceptive mask of fate. The Sermon family of Nantic had long been admired by neighbors for their outward display of success and harmony. From the sidewalk, their crisp salt-box house stood as a symbol of the American dream. White picket fence, manicured flower beds and wind chimes that tinkled sweetly in the coastal breeze. At the heart of this household was Ellen Cerrone, a bright-spirited woman whose gentle warmth drew people in. Her laugh, lively but never overbearing, had a way of making people feel instantly at home. Ellen's days were woven together with simple joys. She painted before breakfast, baked pies on Sundays, and never missed a community gathering. Even as her pregnancy advanced, with a round belly hinting at new beginnings, she moved through life with steady grace. People in Nantic often said her kindness was contagious, quick to lend a hand, quicker still to forgive. Standing beside her was her husband, Edward Sermon. Highly intelligent and poised, Edward was a local college lecturer praised for his sharp wit and polished manners. Many in town admired the couple for their entrepreneurial knack, watching as they grew their small advertising photography firm into a modest local success. Their partnership looked unbreakable, Ellen's friendliness balancing Edward's reserved, sometimes aloof charm, but beyond the painted shutters and magazine-worthy smiles, their marriage bore the strains of everyday realities. Friends sometimes caught flashes of tension, a lingering silence at a dinner party, a rare sharp word as they closed the door behind them. While Edward's public persona was measured and affable, Ellen's closest confidants noticed her voice occasionally tightening when she spoke about his long nights away or mysterious business trips. There were hushed whispers. Some wondered if Edward's intellect sometimes became a veil for deeper, unspoken distance. Others, picking up on Ellen's fleeting glances and half-restrained sighs, guessed at sorrows she carried but wouldn't voice. Yet for the people of Nantic, the Sermon household remained the shiny proof that fortune belonged to the upright and hardworking. To outsiders, they seemed to dance seamlessly through the small-town rituals, church picnics, Little League games, and 4th of July parades. Their photographs, beaming and windswept on the boardwalk, graced mantles across the neighborhood. No one, not the hairdresser nor the mailman, suspected that their perfect family image was a fragile ballet, choreographed to mask hurt and longing. For Ellen, the hope that a new baby would mend old wounds kept her pressing onward. For Edward, The pressure to keep up appearances built walls taller than anyone could see. In truth, their story was no different from so many others. A family held together not only by love, but by hope, fear, pride, and the desperate wish that pretending could somehow make happiness real. Fateful night, the beach trip, and the desperate call. On that humid August evening of 1985, Nantic's shoreline lay hushed beneath a velvet sky, while the hum of distant waves all but drowned out the underlying tension in one unsuspecting home. Edward Sermon, esteemed college lecturer and proud head of what appeared to be the perfect family, had packed up his duffel bag and left with 4 friends for a weekend boating excursion on the Atlantic. As their laughter faded with the sound of the car engine echoing down the coastal road, Ellen Sermon, 6 months pregnant and glowing despite private burdens, remained home alone in their tastefully kept house. Edward's habit of coordinating every detail of his schedule made the timing of his departure seem both natural and, to some, almost rehearsed. Before he left, Edward reminded Ellen yet again to keep the doors locked. An odd warning in a town so safe parents routinely left bicycles strewn on lawns all night. Ellen, used to her husband's cautious nature, humored him with a gentle smile, her mind elsewhere as she watched his figure disappear down the drive. The following day, as the first bright rays pushed through the kitchen's lace curtains, Edward found himself suddenly uneasy. He remembered that their family's modest pleasure cruiser, docked back at the Nantic Marina just a few miles away, might have been left without the cabin lights switched off. Oddly anxious, he attempted to call home several times, no answer. He rationalized that Ellen, ever the social butterfly, was likely out with friends or perhaps napping off a bout of morning sickness that had stubbornly clung to her pregnancy. But as hours slipped by, so did Edward's composure. By late Saturday, when his calls were still met with the void of a silent receiver, a sliver of worry began whispering at the edges of his mind. By Sunday, 2 whole days without contact, that whisper was a roar. In a moment that would haunt the memory of everyone involved, Edward dialed the number of their neighbor, Joan Rister, voice tight and brittle as he requested a quick check-in on Ellen. But Joan was away with her own family. In a kind of growing panic disguised as pragmatism, Edward turned next to Ellen's trusted co-worker, Ryan Fredrickson. Theirs was a long-standing friendship, Ryan having worked late on projects at their kitchen table, and Ellen often confiding in him about work and, on occasion, the ups and downs of her marriage. Deciding not to leave matters to chance, Ryan agreed to drive over, already unsettled by Edward's apparent distress. When Ryan arrived at the Sermon home, subtle signals of neglect and worry were visible long before the front door. The porch light was still on against the early gray dusk, and the air conditioning unit hummed almost frantically, spitting cold into the thick summer evening. He rapped on the door, calling Ellen's name, only to be met with a heavy, unnatural silence, broken only by the barking of the Sermon family's dog from somewhere deep inside. The door, curiously, was locked, a rarity for the neighborhood, and especially for Ellen, who was known for her open-door warmth. Ryan circled the house, his footsteps crunching on the gravel path as uneasiness clawed at his stomach. Through tightly drawn blinds, nothing was visible. Recalling a side window that stuck on humid days, Ryan forced it open and climbed in, all the while talking quietly to himself in shaky reassurance. Inside, the house was dim, the air impossibly cold, and on the floor he noticed spots of dog mess, a sign that no one had tended the house for days. He called again, his voice bouncing off the walls. "Ellen, you home?" There was no reply. Ryan's worry grew tangible as he moved from the kitchen to the stairwell, making his way step by tentative step to the second floor. The master bedroom door was shut, the faint trace of a cold metallic tang hanging in the air. He hesitated, then knocked. Silence. With a trembling hand he pushed open the door and was blasted by a wave of chill air before the horror registered in his gaze. Ellen lay on the bed, motionless and exposed, her body already claimed by the unnatural rigor of death. Ryan staggered back, throat tight, racing down the stairs and into the quiet, panicked heat outside. He dialed the police, the words tumbling out in staccato fragments. "You have to come. Please. Something's wrong. She's gone." In the minutes that followed, Nantic's tranquil summer evenings would never feel safe again. Chilling discovery, a friend and a premonition. In the humid, weighty silence of late summer, there's something uniquely unnerving about finding yourself the first to step across the threshold of a home where something is irrevocably wrong. For Ryan Fredrickson, Ellen's friend and colleague, An unshakable sense of dread had settled in long before he ever entered the sermon house. The string of missed calls, the unanswered doorbell, the unnatural stillness bleeding through drawn curtains, all these were signs that gnawed at his subconscious, warning him of truths too dreadful to entertain. When Ryan arrived at the sermon residence that evening, he was immediately struck by details that didn't fit the pattern of Nantic's typical serenity. The porch light, usually set to a cozy dim, blazed into the dusk as if to ward off the encroaching darkness. Air conditioning hummed hyperactively, the machine's steady drone filling the air with a sterile chill. Most tellingly, the front door, usually left invitingly ajar by Ellen, was firmly locked. Ryan, recalling a time he'd teased Ellen for her open-door trust in the world, felt a cold prickling down the back of his neck. Nothing about the house felt familiar, save the anxious barking of the family dog echoing through the walls, pleading, frantic, as if it too sensed a rupture in the world it once trusted. Ryan's approach to the house was hesitant. Each footstep crunched over the gravel with a sense of trespass. Circling the house, he peered through shaded windows, unable to glimpse any signs of movement or life. He relied on the fragile hope that maybe, somehow, Ellen was simply asleep, or blissfully unaware of the growing storm of worry outside her door. He found a window slightly ajar, a quirk Ellen had always meant to fix, and with more guilt than bravado, forced it open just enough to slip inside. Once within the house, the oppressive cold was the first thing to strike him. The air was sharp and stagnant, and the usual scent of baked bread or Ellen's favorite vanilla candles was conspicuously absent. Instead, a metallic tang lingered with something indefinable, hinting at decay and desperation. The dog, both frightened and relieved to see a familiar face, yipped quietly, tail down and eyes wide. Ryan moved from room to room, every shadow stretched too long, every quiet too deep. He called Ellen's name again and again, his voice ricocheting through empty rooms, barely puncturing the silence. As he entered the hallway, scattered signs of neglect became apparent. Scatterings of newspapers, unwashed dishes in the sink, dark stains where the dog had relieved itself. These weren't just signs of a missed cleaning day, they spoke of an absence stretching longer than a simple errand or nap. A knot of panic tightened in Ryan's chest, his mind racing through possible explanations, each more ominous than the last. Summoning his courage, he climbed the stairs to the second floor, the house creaking in protest underfoot. The corridor to the master bedroom felt interminable, each step weighed down by memories of past, happier visits. He hesitated before the bedroom door, heart pounding, and gave a tentative knock. Nothing. What followed was a moment balanced on the edge between hope and dread. Ryan, driven by both duty and fear, pushed open the door. Time seemed to slow, the chill of the room lapping at his skin. The sight that greeted him, forever burned in his memory, was unnatural, unthinkable. Ellen, once the very heart of the Sermon family, lay motionless on the bed, her body betrayed by a brutal silence and the signature rigidity of death. Ryan recoiled, struggling for breath, the world tilting under the weight of what he'd witnessed. Instinct took over. Flight, escape, anything to get away from the room's ghastly reality. He burst down the stairs and into the evening heat, hands shaking, heart thrumming in his ears, and grabbed for the phone. Words tumbled out to the police, urgent, disjointed, desperate. In that instant, the peaceful facade of Nantic was irreparably shattered, and Ryan's life, just like that of the entire town, would never again be the same. First solution: scattered clues. The initial investigation into Ellen's murder unfolded in a haze of confusion, with police desperately seeking any clue that might unravel the knot of tragedy that had befallen Nantic. The scene inside the Sermon residence was both chilling and confoundingly pristine, almost as if the killer had meticulously staged the aftermath to baffle even the most seasoned detectives. Officers moved through each room, careful not to disturb potential evidence, their eyes searching for the out-of-place, the unexplained, the accidental oversight. Early suspicions rose from the absence of any signs of forced entry. All doors and windows remained perfectly intact, except for the side window Ryan had forced open in his panic to enter the house. Not a lock picked, not a pane shattered. It was as if the perpetrator had been let in, or perhaps had never left. This detail narrowed the possibilities significantly. Could the killer have been someone Ellen had known and trusted? Someone to whom she would willingly open her door on an ordinary summer night? The answer hovered unspoken, adding weight to every new theory. What shocked investigators further was the careful arrangement of the bedroom. Ellen, 6 months pregnant, lay exposed and vulnerable, her lifeless body betraying neither frantic struggle nor defense. No overturned furniture, no broken items, no visible chaos. Scattered around were her undergarments, along with marks on her neck telling a tale of strangulation, the deep, cruel bruises and the peculiar impression that pointed straight to an ordinary piece of clothing twisted into a deadly tool. Yet the rest of the room remained untouched, a testament to the measured, chilling calm with which the entire act had been carried out. Police catalogs quickly grew heavy with small fragments of seemingly unconnected evidence. They documented the set of clothing found near the bed, the rather clinical lack of fingerprints from anyone unfamiliar, and the presence of biological stains, saliva, traces of semen and other fluids on the bed sheets. DNA technology of the 1980s was rudimentary at best, and these traces, though promising, could not immediately reveal the killer's identity. Some had likely been left there from weeks or months prior, others hastily wiped away in a panicked effort to erase the truth. Outside the immediate scene, officers scoured for additional motives. Nothing was stolen. Jewelry glistened untouched atop the dresser, wallets filled with cash lay in their usual places. No enemies, no threats, no evidence of a botched burglary or an act of revenge. Life in Nantic was typically uneventful. The Sermon family, for all outward appearances, was respected and liked. This lack of a clear motive sent the investigation wobbling further. Instead of answers, every clue conjured fresh confusion. For days, law enforcement traded theories: jealous lover, opportunistic stranger, random violence, all seeming increasingly implausible as each piece of evidence was fastidiously catalogued and ultimately failed to fit a cohesive narrative. Despite their best efforts, the early flood of evidence felt like assembling a puzzle with half the pieces missing, and the image changed every time they believed they were making progress. The scattered, ragged mois became both the greatest frustration and the only hope for future revelation. Network of suspicions, a closed circle with tangled relationships. In the aftermath of the chilling discovery, the investigation into Ellen's death became a tangled web of suspicion, one that wound its way inexorably through every corridor of Nantic's social fabric. Detectives soon found themselves ensnared within a closed circle of potential suspects, all intimately connected by the threads of family ties, friendship, professional rivalry, and simmering resentment. What from the outside had seemed a tranquil small-town community now revealed itself as a complicated tapestry of secrets and unspoken histories. The first order of business was locking down the perimeter, not just physically securing the Sermon residence, but identifying and mapping the constellation of people who had access to Ellen's life and inner world. The list, surprisingly short and at the same time overwhelmingly complex, included Edward Sermon, the grieving husband whose poised exterior hid cracks of frustration and jealousy that, according to whispered rumors, may have run deeper than expected. Close friends and co-workers, particularly those who had shared confidences or witnessed strained moments in the couple's marriage. Ellen's best friend, who had heard cryptic comments about fear and fatigue. Her colleague Ryan, still shaken from his grim discovery. Certain neighbors whose proximity offered both opportunity and motive, a local handyman, a babysitter who knew the house's quirks, and even the next-door family who had sometimes argued late into the night. Detectives recognized that this circle, small as it was riddled with overlapping relationships, grudges and layers of trust both genuine and manufactured. Every interview peeled back another layer. What began as polite recollections slid, under the weight of police questioning, into defensive explanations. Dramas that once seemed petty in the daylight, minor debts, unresolved crushes, silent rivalries now pulsed with sinister potential after dark. As the investigation pressed forward, every aspect of the Sermon family's social sphere became suspicious by default. Detectives worked round the clock, poring over phone records, bank statements, and community event logs as if desperately seeking a clue hidden among birthday parties and church suppers. The residents, who so recently would have set out folding chairs together for a summer barbecue, now watched each other through narrowed eyes, suddenly aware of just how fragile their alliances could be. The tight-knit quality of Nantic, once its greatest asset, rapidly became the chief obstacle for law enforcement. The closed circle protected itself, often unconsciously. Rumors morphed even the purest friendships into possible conspiracies. Each bit of gossip took on heavier meaning. A forgotten argument from years ago, a neighbor's car seen idling outside the Sermon house late at night, a hasty glance exchanged during an interview, every action was placed under a magnifying glass. The police soon realized that the proximity and intimacy of the town, made clear lines of suspicion even more difficult to draw. The simplest family squabble felt like potential motive. Every kind gesture might disguise guilt. At times it felt as if the investigation was looping endlessly, a serpent devouring its own tail. False leads abounded, and every hopeful clue inevitably circled back to the same interconnected cast of characters. The relational web seemed almost designed to protect the truth, deflecting suspicion in ever-tightening orbits, as if Nantic itself were unwilling to surrender its most terrible secret. Perfect exculpatory evidence? In the days following the chilling discovery, investigators set out to test the boundaries of every possible alibi, aware that even the seemingly perfect ones could crumble if inspected from the right angle. Edward's sermon quickly became the epicenter of scrutiny. On paper, his alibi was pristine. Dozens of witnesses could attest to his presence on the boat trip, and photographs from that weekend showed him laughing, relaxing, and raising a glass with friends under the hot Connecticut sun. Time-stamped receipts from the Marina bar and credit card transactions backed up his itinerary perfectly, creating the impression that not a single minute of his weekend was unaccounted for. The police, however, were relentless. They combed through every thread, examining call logs, coastal toll booth records, and surveillance footage from gas stations along the shoreline. Some investigators theorized that Edward's intellect and meticulous nature had enabled him to choreograph a nearly unbreakable sequence of events, an almost theatrical demonstration intended to place him miles away from the scene of the crime, with layer upon layer of corroboration. But behind the bravado of a clockwork alibi, cracks began to show. Forensic specialists noted a faint scratch on Edward's wrist when interviewing him, a detail he offhandedly attributed to hauling a tangled anchor line onto the boat. Skeptics on the team, however, were unconvinced. Was it possible this scratch was fresh? Did it align with the struggle marks found beneath Ellen's fingernails? The question hovered, unanswered but insistent. Another shadow crept in from the phone records. While Edward's cell phone, at the time a car phone, had made multiple calls from the marina, a stray gap appeared in the call logs, just enough time for a hurried drive back to town and a swift return. Yet, when confronted, Edward's manner was unflappable. He offered sharp, calm explanations, supported by the testimony of his friends, all of whom vouched with practiced certainty for his continuous presence. It was this collective memory, the group's unified recollection, that frustrated detectives most. The friends on the boat, perhaps unwittingly, had woven an airtight narrative. No one could quite recall every hour, but all were sure Edward had been there, that he couldn't possibly have slipped away. And so, despite a persistent undercurrent of suspicion, the so-called perfect alibi stood impressively intact. A masterful puzzle designed to withstand even the most determined assault from the truth. A glimmer of light, forensic assessment, and the test of time. The investigation had hit a frustrating standstill, the evidence as scattered and faint as footprints on a windswept shore. Detectives pored over reports with tired eyes, looping through possible timelines and theories that led nowhere. It wasn't until the county's chief forensic examiner, Dr. Melinda Hawthorne, stepped into the dimly lit evidence room that a glimmer of hope pierced the gloom. Renowned for her meticulous approach and almost preternatural instinct for hidden truths, Dr. Hawthorne was known in her circles as someone who could make the dead speak. As she began her examination of Ellen's body, details emerged that defied initial assumptions. The temperature of the master bedroom, the chilling artificial cold, drew her immediate attention. On her visit to the crime scene, she quietly noted how the air conditioning had been set to its lowest possible temperature, humming steadily for what must have been hours or even days. If this was an effort to preserve something, or to mask something crucial, Dr. Hawthorne was determined to find out. Time of death, she mused to her assistant as they studied tissue samples and body temperature records, is rarely as simple as it seems. The fundamental forensic tool, the measurement of rigor mortis and the slow cooling of the body under the effect of environmental factors, had been altered by the sub-zero room. Charting body temperature, checking for post-mortem lividity, and recalculating the onset and completion of rigor, Dr. Hawthorne worked through the night. Her brow furrowed as she compared her findings with the initial pronouncements from police. Something didn't fit. Early estimates placed the time of death in alignment with Edward's absence, providing him, conveniently, an airtight alibi. But the data refused to comply with neat conclusions. With methodical focus, Dr. Hawthorne performed temperature modeling, consulting HVAC records and questioning the energy company about usage spikes at the Sermon residence. Her calculations led to a startling realization. Whoever had set the thermostat had tampered with the perceived window of death, extending the time frame well past the supposed last sighting of Ellen. If only the police had relied on the cold comfort of ambient readings, the truth would have been lost, but Dr. Hawthorne's persistence shifted the foundation of the whole case. The journey to expose the criminal, the carelessness of an arrogant perpetrator. The unraveling of the killer's carefully constructed facade began in the most unexpected, almost mundane way, a small detail overlooked, a misstep born from arrogance. For months, the investigation had ebbed and flowed, haunted by insufficient evidence and the perplexing ease with which the murderer seemed to glide past suspicion. But detectives, energized by a breakthrough in the forensic timeline, redoubled their efforts, scouring every sliver of testimony and transaction with newfound scrutiny. It was in this state of relentless, meticulous review that a seemingly trivial anecdote from a neighborhood child grew into a lightning rod for suspicion. During one final round of neighborhood interviews, a sharp-eyed detective picked up on the shy, faltering words of a young girl who lived next door to the Sermon family. She spoke of a phone call she'd received late in the afternoon on the day Ellen died. Someone claiming to be Edward had called to ask if Ellen could come by for a quick chat, only the voice didn't quite sound like him. It was strained, hurried, almost forced. This red flag, innocuous to most, triggered a deep ripple through the investigative team. Who would have had the need to impersonate Edward, and why had the timing of the call so neatly aligned with the only possible window in which Edward might have returned undetected to the scene? Piecing together these fragments, detectives began to see a pattern forming in the fog. Bank records reflected an unusual withdrawal that same afternoon, a sum small enough to avoid notice but out of character for Edward's usually unflinching financial habits. Additionally, traffic cameras near an intersection just outside town captured the blurry outline of a car matching Edward's make and model speeding by at an odd hour. When confronted with these findings, Edward's previously unbreakable poise faltered ever so slightly, a delay too long before an answer, a blink too quick to mask discomfort. From there, the investigation accelerated, zeroing in on the moments when Edward's alibi stopped fitting quite so perfectly. Detectives mapped out every minute of his weekend, the boating trip so conveniently public, the marina bar receipts, the jovial photographs, all now recontextualized under suspicion. Calls logged from his car phone demonstrated a gap eerily concurrent with the estimated time of Ellen's death, as recalibrated by Dr. Hawthorne's forensic analysis. Suddenly the perfect alibi appeared far more fragile than anyone could have foreseen. Finally, forensic evidence, once thought inconclusive, shifted in meaning. Fibers from Edward's clothing were found embedded in the bedroom carpet in a location inconsistent with any innocent explanation. A single partial fingerprint, formerly dismissed as smudged and unusable, was reanalyzed using emerging techniques and pointed squarely toward Edward. The narrative, meticulously crafted and arrogantly maintained, began to unravel not through one dramatic revelation but through the slow accumulation of seemingly minor mistakes. The hubris of a man convinced of his own invincibility became the very thread that unraveled his freedom. As the investigation closed in, Edward's demeanor shifted from arrogant composure to tense resignation. Even as he continued to protest his innocence, the mounting weight of overlooked evidence, phone impersonations, financial anomalies, and physical traces, became undeniable. In the end, it was not a grand confession or a moment of cinematic drama, but the inexorable buildup of small betrayals and the killer's own overconfidence that allowed justice to finally pierce the darkness enveloping Nantic. The explosion of justice, circumstantial evidence, and a fateful trial. The quest for justice in Nantic did not resolve overnight. It unfolded like a long, tense orchestral piece, a series of escalating revelations, desperate frustrations, and, in the eyes of the grieving town, the ultimate reckoning of a courtroom drama that would forever define their collective memory. After nearly 5 years of exhaustive, and at times seemingly futile work, the legal system finally took center stage. Edward Sermon, protected so long by a nearly flawless facade, now stood vulnerable before the law, prosecuted not by a single damning piece of evidence, but by a painstakingly woven tapestry of indirect proof. The prosecution's case hung on the careful connection of countless threads, a patchwork of circumstantial and forensic detail only meaningful in aggregate. The evidence presented to the jury reflected the nerve-wracking dedication of all those nights spent poring over old phone records, scrutinizing banking transactions for peculiarities, and reenacting timelines within the ever-tightening window provided by the forensic examiner's revelations. There were the inconsistencies in Edward's marina trip alibi, small windows of time unaccounted for, and a series of witnesses whose stories, subtly prodded and cross-examined, began to show cracks. Each testimony seemed, at first glance, insignificant. A neighbor recalling the faint sound of a car door slamming at midnight, a clerk who remembered Edward buying fuel at an unusual hour, and even the weathered memory of a traffic cop who years later testified about a speeding ticket that had never made sense until viewed in this new, chilling context. Then there were the expert witnesses. Dr. Hawthorne explaining with measured precision how the manipulated temperature in the sermon bedroom had pushed the scientific boundaries of homicide investigation, and a forensic analyst changing the trajectory of the case by showing the newly interpreted fiber and fingerprint evidence. Defense attorneys, of course, attempted to atomize these connections, questioning the reliability of witness memory, the statistical rarity of such forensic overlap, and the possibility of contamination or coincidence. For days the courtroom was a battlefield of narrative and counter-narrative, attorneys pacing the floor, jurors alternating between skepticism and grim fascination. Yet, as the threads were drawn tighter, the power of accumulation revealed its truth. No single clue was definitive, but together they formed a net from which even the most cunning of suspects could not free himself. Spectators from Nantic, many of whom had known Ellen, her warmth and the innocence of the world before her death, packed the gallery, sometimes squeezing hands or dabbing at tears as old wounds were reopened for all to see. The press chronicled every day's development with a mixture of righteous hunger and human empathy, aware that this trial was much more than a question of guilt. It was therapy for a wounded town and perhaps penance for their earlier blind trust. When the verdict was finally read, guilty on all counts, the dam of emotion burst. There was no dramatic confession, no last-minute reprieve, but simply the catharsis of communal grief at last finding a voice, sweetened and darkened by the gravity of irreversible loss. Edward's sentencing was long and severe, but most in attendance felt the punishment only scratched the surface of the true cost. Justice, in this historic trial, was not so much about retribution, as about the fragile hope that, by naming the truth at last, some measure of peace could settle over their haunted coastal town. The price of crime and wounds that never heal. The aftermath of the trial did not bring the sweeping sense of relief or vengeance that many in Nantic might have anticipated. While Edward Sermon received a lengthy prison sentence, a gesture of judicial closure, the true cost of his crime reverberated endlessly through the lives of those left behind. The price of the violence transcended courtrooms and headlines, carving silent wounds into the town's collective soul. Even as the news faded from the public eye, the ripple effects turned everyday moments bittersweet, robbing the landscape of pure joy and security. For Ellen's family there was the unyielding ache of absence, her parents left with unanswered questions and nightly bouts of grief, her siblings forever haunted by memories of laughter and family gatherings now tainted by tragedy. Friends withdrew, guilt-ridden over missed signs or unresolved arguments, some plagued by the lingering suspicion that they, somehow, could have intervened. The birth of the child Ellen never got to meet became a symbol of dreams shattered, aspirations stifled in a single senseless act. The town of Nantic itself was fundamentally changed. Gossip shifted from idle curiosity to a defense mechanism, with neighbors erecting invisible walls, quick to distrust and slow to forgive. Former traditions, block parties, impromptu boardwalk strolls, the easy openness of sharing pie in a neighbor's kitchen, became relics of a more innocent time. The local church saw pews filled with faces bowed in prayer, seeking answers or comfort in a universe suddenly exposed as fragile and cruel. For those in law enforcement, the aftermath meant a lingering sense of what-ifs and their own trauma, an investigation that had forced them to upend relationships and probe the darkness nestled within their own community. Some officers retired early, others admitted to turning down future cases like this, unable to separate the image of Ellen's gentle smile from the horrors they'd uncovered. Even Dr. Hawthorne, the forensic examiner, was seen less and less in public, having paid a price for turning cold evidence into devastating truth. Perhaps most subtle, but equally enduring, was the generational impact. Children who had once played hopscotch in the shadow of the Sermon family lawn now grew up rehearsing caution, inheriting the lessons and anxieties of an event they were too young to remember firsthand. Parents instituted curfews, locks were changed, and the shared myth of Nantic as an untouched haven dissolved. Long after Edward's name ceased to be whispered and the sermon house changed hands, the legacy of violence persisted, quietly directing the ways people chose whom to love, whom to fear, and whom to trust. In the end, the cost was not just the years of a single man's life behind bars, nor the irretrievable loss of a beloved wife and mother-to-be. It was the endless echo of a moment of cruelty, a legacy of unease and sorrow that in ways both seen and unseen would never fully heal. The scar, like the tide on Nantic's shore, would recede and return, over and over, reminding the living that even in the gentlest of places, darkness can leave its mark forever. Final message: a lesson on karma and responsibility in marriage. In the hushed wake of tragedy, a final message lingers, and it resounds far beyond the formal closure of courtrooms, prison cells, and even gravestones. The cautionary echoes from Nantic do not solely serve as spectral reminders of a single violent act. They ripple outwards as a profound meditation on the nature of cause and effect, responsibility, and those unseen bonds that tether spouses, families, and entire communities. The murder of Ellen Sermon, cloaked not in the chaos of unchecked malice but wrapped in the veils of intimacy, presents a relentless sermon about the forces we unleash in our closest relationships. Marriage, after all, is not merely a contract or a tableau of external happiness. It is a daily negotiation with truth, pride, forgiveness, and sometimes brittle silence. The Sermon tragedy holds up a raw and unsettling mirror to the ways secrets metastasize within domestic walls, a longing suppressed, a resentment allowed to fester, the accumulation of small deceptions, each seemingly harmless until the unbearable weight of all that is left unsaid becomes catastrophic. Edward's failure was not simply that of a criminal but of a partner who denied vulnerability and empathy, letting appearance triumph over genuine connection until the unthinkable became real. This lesson is not confined to the guilty alone. Friends, neighbors, and even passing acquaintances are shown to be complicit, through willful blindness, through their inclination to prefer comforting myths over uncomfortable truths, and through the failure to reach out when signals of distress flicker at the edge of perception. The communal aftermath in Nantic becomes an urgent reminder. Responsibility in marriage is not isolated. It weaves itself into the broader tapestry of communal care and watchfulness. The reluctance to confront, to question, to support, or simply to ask, "Are you truly okay?" is perhaps the most pervasive sin of all when hindsight reveals the cost. As years pass, the narrative warns that the consequences of unchecked pride, anger, or neglect are not limited to those who act or fail to act. Children grow up instinctively cautious, old friends part ways, and entire towns reinvent their sense of normal. The invisible inheritance of emotional wounds can pass from generation to generation, coloring how love is given, trust is extended, and mistakes are forgiven. Ultimately, Nantic's story is a somber yet invaluable testament. Every relationship is a living thing that demands humility, courage, and unwavering honesty. When care evaporates, darkness flourishes. When wounds are ignored, they deepen. To those willing to listen, the last words echo with unwavering clarity. Justice is never a clean, finite act, and our responsibility to nurture, protect, and hold accountable within marriage and beyond has consequences far wider than we dare imagine.